Once you have created elements in Illustrator, you're going to need to move them, scale them, adjust them, change their stacking order, all functions which are easy to access and apply. Let's take a look at the huge difference between the selection and direct selection tools, as well as free transform, grouping, nudging, stacking, and the all-important isolation mode. Okay, in our CMYK document, let's now jump over to our left-hand page, our A3 poster, and select our background shape. Now what we're going to do is just copy that into memory, Command-C or Control-C on the PC, and for a new keyboard shortcut for you, let's go to the Edit menu and go down, and you see we have Paste in Front, and that'll basically drop it back down in the same location it was copied from. So it's kind of like Paste in Place, but it really depends on the object that's selected. But Paste in Front, a simple way to duplicate the current object over the top of itself. So Command F or Control F on the PC will do that. And then we can come over to the color palette, and let's maybe just quickly fill this with a red so it looks different to the background when we change it. Now we want to use the transform dialog boxes to adjust the size and potentially the position as well of these objects. So let's start out up here in the control panel and go ahead and click on transform. Now the chances are you have a larger screen than I do here, so you won't see the word transform, but you will see these options, and you can see that we have our width and our height, and I've currently got them not constrained. Okay, if you click on there and this icon appears here, changing one dimension will proportionally change the other one as well, so make sure that that is deselected. Now the height, we're simply going to change this to, say, 140 millimeters, and you'll notice our anchor point is currently in the center, alright? So if we go ahead and say enter or OK, it's going to scale this object down to 140 height from its original central point, okay? Which is fine, but we now want to move this down the page so its top edge is aligned at precisely 260 millimeters down. Now these are dimensions I've already got in my artwork, which is why we're using them. So if we go back to transform here, what we can do now is set our anchor point to be on the top edge. Then we can change its Y value. Notice when we change from the center point here, which is currently 210 down, halfway down the page, we click on the top anchor point, we can see that the top is actually 140 down. All right, so let's go ahead and select the 140 there, and we'll change it for 260. Go ahead and hit return, and it drops it down into the right location. Now width-wise, this is also very cool. We want to change the width. We don't have any vertical guides on this, so we can't simply snap it to the width. But I do know that I want 30 millimeters on each side, okay? That means this object needs to be 60 millimeters less in size, correct? So how about this for a really cool option? Go back to transform. Make sure we're on one of the centers. It doesn't matter if it's the top or the middle because we're scaling the width here. As long as we're in the middle on any of these three, what we can do is come to the width, and at the end of the current value, doesn't matter what you've got it set to, we're going to hit minus 60. Okay, so we're going to ask Illustrator to do 297 minus 60 millimeters. Say OK, and it automatically scales it. Isn't that very cool? So very easy to do, and it's nice that Illustrator can handle this multitude of scaling functions for us. Now, we've got this down in a position where it might be used as a text frame. So what we'll do is use our keyboard shortcut as we did before and pull up the split into grid function, okay? And remember that we set that keyboard shortcut to Command-Option-Shift-G on the Mac or Control-Alt-Shift-G on the PC. And we'll go into the columns, and let's increase this. Let's go ahead and turn on preview as we do it. Let's add, say, 6 columns, make it nice and even here, and we'll also change the gutter to a nice round 5 millimeters, I think. That should do the trick. All right, let's say OK there. Now what we want to do is bring in another graphic from another document that we can use down at the bottom here so we can bend and distort our text frames around it, okay? So what we'll do is bring up the open dialog box, Command-O or Control-O on the PC, and back inside our project files once more, let's go into the Illustrator files folder, and we're going to come down and choose this one, Lechime Shape, okay? Now, if you select it and open it, basically what this is, if we just fit in window here, depending on the size of your screen you're looking at, you can see I've created a very simple silhouette of 3 mountains, okay? And this company that we're creating the advertising for is basically being called Le Cime dell'Italia, which simply means, if you translate it, the tops of Italy. It's basically a bicycle touring company based up in the mountains in Italy. So we've basically got here the cime, the 3 tops, if you like, of the mountains. And I want to use this as a graphic element that would push the type away, and we can see that reflected when we do the artwork later on. So let's go ahead and select that graphic, Command-C, Control-C on the PC, and copy it into memory, come back over to our print campaign, okay? And at this point, it's probably worth creating a brand new layer. So use your keyboard shortcut now to bring up the layer options and a new layer, and let's call this mountain shape. All right, and we go ahead and click OK. You can see it has been created above the backdrop color layer, which is where we were a second ago. And then what we can do is paste in place, because again, I've got it prepared in a document for you. So let's go to Edit and choose Paste in Place. It drops it down at the bottom here. What we can do is just lock that to be on the safe side. Now, whilst we're here, let's come down and select our text frames. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and make sure that all 6 of them are highlighted. Now, these aren't text frames yet, but that's the ultimate goal here. And what we'll do is also create a brand new layer for these and call them Type. Click OK, and just like we've done before, if we just scroll down here, we can see the red dot on the backdrop color layer tells us we have elements selected. With those 6 highlighted, we can now drag them up so they are on their own layer, okay? So what we can do now is let's zoom in and take a look at using a different selection tool, because everything so far has been done using the standard selection tool. This is the black arrow up here inside your tools palette. Well, you've also got the direct selection tool here, and this is what we really need to use to edit the path. Remember that a path is merely a shape that's defined by points. So if we can access those individual points and move them around, we can alter the shape of the path. So we're going to switch back and forth between these, so it's worth noticing those keyboard shortcuts. V for selection, A for direct selection, and everyone has their own little ways of remembering them. For some reason, I call them Victoria and Albert. Don't ask me why. I don't know if it's a British thing, but that's how I do it, okay? So direct selection tool, what we're going to do is hit A to access that, and you see we have a hollow cursor now, basically. Now, nothing changes until we deselect, and then we reselect. Now, to make this easier to see, let's go into our outline mode, Command Y, Control Y on the PC, and move over one of our corner points and select it. You can see that that is now solid, whereas the other ones are hollow. What this means is if we grab that point and drag it around, you can see that we're actually changing the shape and form of that entire path, all right? So very easy to do, and we can, easily take this out of control. What we're going to do is use it for a very precise function, if we just undo that, which is to align each of these points to the guideline that we've created here by bringing in that shape in the background, okay? So feel free to zoom in and look a little bit more closely at this, and we've also got our smart guides activated by default, so as we drag one of these points up, it's going to stay perfectly straight and also align precisely to that shape we have locked in the background, okay? And this is really very cool. The direct selection tool is very powerful. You need to use it at the right time, obviously. You don't use it for moving, you use it for editing, okay? So you can scroll across here with the hand tool as you do this and make sure that all of these items snap up into the right location, okay? So very, very handy, very quick and easy. Now, if we do this a bit later on, once you learn how to do things like reflections and copy and paste multiple elements across the page, you could actually just do half of these and then reflect a copy of them on the other side, but you'll learn that in time, I'm sure. So if I zoom back down now, you can see that I've adjusted those objects, and maybe if we come over here into our mountain shape and turn off the visibility for the layer, you can see the exact result. So any type that we then ultimately flow into here will sort of be forced to hide down here and move across to the left and then reappear in the next column and do the same down here. So even if the shape isn't there, we'll still get the sense that the mountain shape is there and the type is flowing around it. So this is actually a very cool way to do it. Now, just as a side note, this can be done using a function called text wrap, which we'll try out a little bit later on. But as well as this particular example serving as a way to show you how to use the direct selection tool, the text wrap function does require that the object which blocks out the type and forces it to move away, in this case the mountain, always has to stay present, okay? If we don't want the mountain there, this is the great way to do it. You customize the complete shape of the text frame, or any object in fact, by using the direct selection tool and the smart guides, and you end up with just the shape you need. Now, as a final option, let's go ahead and turn on the mountain shape again. Let's say if we were going to keep this shape and it was maybe tinted slightly differently, it was just barely there in the background, we wouldn't really want the type to flow down inside these and actually touch the very edges there, okay? If you imagine lines of type going in here, they will touch that edge. So maybe we want these particular bottom edges to be another, 3 or 4 millimeters further up, okay? Well, remember our move dialog box that we've already used many times. We've seen it work on guides, and we can use it on objects. You can also use it on points, all right? So let's do this. With the direct selection tool, we're going to click and drag, and remember we've got the mountain layer locked, so we're not worried about selecting those. We click and drag across, and we've highlighted only those bottom points on the shape. If we now bring up our move dialog by hitting the enter key on the keyboard, we say horizontally we don't wish to move, but vertically I'm going to go up -4 millimeters. Have a look at that. Perfectly precise movement, still reflecting the same shape, but only moving the bottom part of those frames. The top stays exactly where they are because we're using the direct selection tool. So go ahead and click OK, and once again we can come back and hide our mountain shape layer here, and if you like, go back into the preview mode and deselect so you can see the finished shape there. Okay, let's go ahead and close down that Illustrator file that's still in the background. We don't need that at this point in time, and we'll fit everything in the window so we can see all of our documents. Now we'll go back to the main selection tool just in case and make sure nothing is highlighted. What we want to do now is look at the ways that we can also transform elements using different tools as opposed to the transform dialogues. Now what we're going to do is take our stripes that we have here on the A4 document and bring them across into the A3 one. So make sure in the layers panel here that we have the Italian stripes layer unlocked so we can go ahead and select them. And then a quick and easy way to get something from one document to another, as well as copy and paste in all the ways that we've learned so far, is to hold down, once again, the Option key or the Alt key on the PC. Now, if you haven't already caught on to this is probably the most powerful keyboard option in Illustrator. Once we add it to different keyboard shortcuts or different tools, it opens up more and more doors. So I really think this is a great option here. Hold down that Option key and simply select an object, drag it to a different location, okay? And I'm going to drag straight across here, holding down that Shift key as well to keep it straight, but you'll see that by holding down Option, we've created a copy, all right? So much faster than copy and paste, simply Option, drag. Now, we can zoom in a little bit closer on here because what we want to do is now tell this particular item to be the same width as our page in the background. Now, as you know, you could go to Transform up here. We could also go through to the Transform panel over here and make the similar adjustments. But what we can do is the first option called Free Transform. There's a free transform tool over here in the tools panel. You can see its keyboard shortcut is E. So go ahead and hit E and you'll see a bounding box appear around the outside of our stripe. So as you can imagine, if we position our cursor over one of these anchor points, I'm going to choose the center one over here and then drag, you'll see that we can increase the width and snap it into our right hand frame there. Okay, so we've now got this to the exact width of our page. Now, you may have also noticed that as you move your cursor outside of Free Transform, it becomes curved. Well, this simply means if you click and drag with that, you've now got access to a rotation tool. Now, you'll notice it does rotate from the center. That's the default, and we do have a little bit of feedback there, but we're not able to tell it, please rotate by this exact number of degrees, okay? This is very much Free Transform, okay? You drag, you move, you distort. Those things are manually done and not numerically, okay? So very quick and handy just by hitting the E key there if you do wish to change the scale or something like that. But if you want to do something more mathematically, then obviously we have more options available for that. So just make sure you undo any rotation that you've done and go back to the main selection tool when done. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you're distorting, i.e. scaling or rotating objects around, is something called stroke scaling. Now, it does apply with Free Transform because you're scaling elements up and down. And let's say we have strokes applied around an object, okay, a border line that's a specific width. You can tell Illustrator to scale that stroke as you scale the object. And, you know, if you're getting artwork from other people that has strokes applied and you wish to scale it up maybe to, you know, billboard size, you would want to make sure that those strokes are scaled. So you need to be aware that that is an option that needs to be turned on or off according to the particular project in hand. Now, the other transform tools, such as rotate and scale, those will give us kind of a visual reminder in a dialog box as to whether we wish to scale strokes. But the reason I'm pointing this out now is a Free Transform doesn't have that, yet the rule still applies. So here's what I'm talking about. Let's go over to our right-hand page, okay, our A4, and let's just lock our stripes and unlock and make visible our wheel, okay? Now, we can't see all of the elements, but what I'm going to do is hover over the outer shape here, okay? Go ahead and select that. And let's come over to the color panel very quickly. Click on the stroke icon here in the background. Remember, X would also do that shortcut for you. And we'll make this a black stroke. And let's come down to the stroke panel here and increase this to maybe 4 point, okay? So if we then hit E to bring us our Free Transform tool, what I would ask you to do at this point is check, double check. come over to the transform panel, go to the flyout menu on the side. Have a look at this option right here, scale, strokes, and effects. You may have that turned on. You may have turned it on inadvertently when you're playing around with the tools. It may be turned on by default. This is something you need to check every once in a while when you're doing free transform, okay? Because you don't want to start scaling things and realize that you have scaled strokes and didn't mean to, and vice versa. So in this case, if we leave it turned off, or if you have it turned on, go ahead and deselect that. And we drag this item out. Remember, we've got 4 points, okay? If we drag out one of these corners, holding down the Option key, or the Alt key on the PC, so we remain centered, and your Shift to make sure we retain a circle, okay? Drag this out, scale it up nice and large, you can see the 4 point does not change, okay? Undo that, go back a step, let's go down and go into Transform and say, please do scale, strokes, and effects. Do the same function, scale that outer edge and drag up, and you'll notice this time, not only visually can you see it's changed, but also we've nearly doubled the width there as well. So this is really another option, very similar to the paste remembers layers function, okay? Very, very useful in its specific time, but something you really need to keep in memory before you start transforming the size and rotation of artwork that has strokes and also pattern fills, which we'll see a little bit later on. So let's go ahead and undo that. So we scale back down, and let's make sure we come up to the side and turn that back off again. Now while we're here, you can see that the transform panel contains all the same position and width and height information that we saw in the control panel, and like I said before, the anchor point essentially as to where the transformation takes place from. We've also got in here the ability to rotate and shear an element. So if we rotate here, one advantage is at least we can use an anchor point to choose at which point that rotation applies from. So let's go back to our main selection tool, V, okay? And for now we could lock the layer, we can lock the wheel, we can come back to that later on, and we can go ahead and hide it. And let's come back to our stripes, make sure that that's unlocked. So let's come over to our A3 again, okay? Over here on the left side we can see our stripes that go across the page and also these horizontal guides that we've got. If I go ahead and select this one, just so we can see it working, let's go ahead and choose a top left anchor point and maybe go down and choose, I don't know, a 45-degree rotation, and you can see exactly what has happened. So definitely a little bit more useful than free transform when it comes to specifying an anchor point from which to rotate. So I just wanted to point that out so you know that it's there. Now we can use this to adjust the height of our shape, because I do want it to snap down to our second line here, which remember we did 10 and 20 millimeters in total. So making sure that we have one of these top anchor points selected, let's come down and make sure we change this now to 20, okay? So that fills out our overall height, and it changed the whole group automatically. It's not just one element in there. So this kind of looks good because we've got, a larger poster, therefore we should, have larger stripes here and utilize that nice color design that we've got. Now something else, I do want this to move down by 10 millimeters. Now you already know the move dialog box, and if I asked you to do that, you'd be there, you'd have it done by now, which is wonderful. But I do want to show you something else called nudging. Now every once in a while, if you're trying to position something just bit by bit, you don't want to do it mathematically, and maybe you don't want to use the cursor because guides are getting in the way. So you can actually nudge something slightly in either direction until it gets into the right location. And for this, you simply use the arrow keys on the keyboard. Now it's important to know what your preferences are set to, and I did point this out back in one of the earlier lessons where we had a look at the preferences. Bring up your preferences dialog box and you'll see the very first item here, keyboard increment, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this to 1 millimeter. That's precisely the value I wish to use just for this example, okay? Go ahead and click OK. And now if I use the down arrow on the keyboard, you'll see it's going to nudge 1 millimeter at a time. And I can actually see that happening over here in the Y-axis. I'm at 123. For every down I do, it's moving 1 millimeter, which is really very cool. Now, like I said, you could do any value here. You could make it very small and just minutely nudge something into place, which is fine. But the other side of this is if you hold down the Shift key and then do your down arrow or up, whichever way you're nudging, and don't forget that includes left and right as well. If you hold down the Shift key and do the nudge, you'll multiply the value by 10, okay? So let's say, for example, I'm going to go back up until we're at 120, then hold down the Shift key, one down arrow, boom, I'm straight into 10 millimeters down, okay? So in some cases, you can use the move dialog. In other cases, if you know what your preferences are set to, you can get there a little bit faster just by knowing a couple of additional shortcuts. Now, all the transformations we've done so far have really applied to individual elements or an already grouped element. So what if we wish to select multiple items and move them together and really sort of keep them selected together so that whenever we pick them up, they're in a group? Well, I'll show you how to do that. Let's close down Transform for a second and come over to our A4 page, and we'll go ahead once again and turn on our wheel. So let's lock up the stripes, turn on the wheel, unlock the wheel layer, and what we want to do is select all of the items on this layer. Now, I'm confident that we only have the wheel circles on this layer, okay? So we could do select all, but then we're going to pick up everything else. But because I know those are the only elements on that layer, in this instance, what you can do is click this small circle on the right to target all elements on a single layer. If you click that, you'll see it's going to pick up all of those circles at the same time. Very handy. Doesn't mean they're grouped, it just means that they're highlighted. So just to make it easier to see what we're doing, let's come up to the color panel, let's go Fill, None, Stroke, Black, and let's set a default there of maybe 2 point. Okay, so everything is now the same. So even though they're selected, like I said, they haven't been grouped or anything else, and that's a very simple command to do. Very straightforward. Command G or Control G on the PC will now group them. So if you go ahead and deselect and now come back over and click on any one of these circles, you see they all highlight at the same time. Now, bear in mind that if you wanted to access just one of them or still affect the points, you can go back to the A key to give us the direct selection tool, deselect, click back on the outside, and you do have access to the individual points as well. So switching back and forth between Victoria and Albert over there, we can easily select the shape that we need to edit, but the main purpose here is that we've grouped them so they can all be moved and transformed at exactly the same time. This will be very useful for a lot of our elements moving forward. Now, to be honest, the direct selection tool really isn't the ideal way to now access individual parts of this group. Illustrator has this fantastic function called isolation, okay? It's very straightforward. We have a group selected. All we need to do is double click it and we'll go into what's called isolation mode. Now, you can see in the upper left, we are basically inside a group which is on the wheel layer. So if you're a Flash user, you would actually recognize this kind of structure where we have an object. This is an object that's inside that object and so on. We might have multiple groups within groups. You can use isolation mode to go down into those, and this basically isolates these particular elements, giving us individual access to them. You see it's like they've been ungrouped, but we're inside almost like a separate artboard. We can't select anything else in our artwork. And in fact, if we look at the whole layout, you can see everything's got a slight tint to it. That's because we're not in there, we're inside this particular group, okay? So this is our isolation mode. Let's just double click anywhere else to exit isolation. Takes us back to where we were. Let's lock the wheel and hide it. And what we're going to do is come down to our flyer here at the bottom, and we'll do the same with this selection grid that we have here. Remember, we created this earlier. I'm going to go ahead, in fact, we can just click and drag across them, and that will select all 9 of those shapes. Once again, Command G or Control G on the PC to group them together. Now I decide, you know what, I want to change the color of this center one to just a solid black for now, all right? Simply double click to go into isolation mode, then we can click on the central shape, come over here into the color panel, make sure our fill is selected, and go over and choose black. As always, double click outside to exit the isolation mode, all right? It's very important what we've learned there, the ability to group items together, but also the ability to go inside them and make further changes. And this is very, very useful when you're organizing your artwork in future. Once we start doing things like masks and things like that, the same rules apply. If you mask an object, you can use isolation to get inside the mask and edit the elements inside, okay? So same functionality, different use, and we'll discover that as we move through the training series. Now, if you still have the wheel layer invisible, just go ahead and turn it back on. One thing to bear in mind is the stacking order of your objects in Illustrator. Basically, the order that they were drawn in creates them from background to foreground in stacking order, if you like. So even if they're all on a single layer or even in a group, like our wheel that we have selected here, there is still a stacking order. Now, layers define the overall stacking of a document, okay? So we know that the stripes are on top of the wheel because we can see that. But there is still a stacking order of all of these circles on this layer because they were drawn at different times in a slightly different order, okay? So I'm going to show you exactly how this works. Well, that entire group is selected. What we're going to do is come up to our color panel and let's go down and maybe fill this with a yellow or a green, whatever color you wish to see. And I'm just going to zoom in on this a little bit closer. Now, if I deselect, you can see our problem. We've filled them with green and they all have a black stroke, but I can't see half of them. Well, that's because when we drew these circles, remember the order in which we drew them. We started with the outside one, then we started with the middle and worked our way out, and this one was the last one that was drawn. That's why we can only see these two. All the others are in there, it's just that they're hidden behind these other shapes. So what we can do is use a new keyboard shortcut in CS5 that allows us to click down through each of these elements, select them, and then we can simply bring to front or center back accordingly. Now, just so you know it exists, if we go ahead and select our group, and in fact, if you wanted to, we could double click to go into isolation here. In the layers panel, we can see this is our group, and if we twirl down our option there, we can see each of the paths that makes up this group. But honestly, they're all green with a black stroke, so it really doesn't help us at this point in time. But I wanted you to know that that's there if you are trying to select an individual item. However, our keyboard shortcut, which is very useful, I'm going to go somewhere around the middle here because I know all of the circles obviously generate from here. And I'm going to hold down the Command key or the Control key on the PC and click to select our current shape. If I then click again, you'll notice I select the next one down, which is pretty cool. What we can do now is tell that to come to the front, all right? Go up to your object menu, go down to Arrange, and you'll see you have Bring to Front, and down here, Center Back if you need it. So Bring to Front, Shift and Command, or Shift Control on the PC, and your right square bracket. That's your keyboard shortcut. If we go ahead and select that, you can see that that circle is now brought to the foreground, and we can see our stroke, okay? So likewise, if we come back down here again, hold down Command, we can click through, click again, and we now find our inner circle that was hidden there. Same thing, we can now use our keyboard shortcut to just bring that to the front. And let's go and do the keyboard shortcut again and just work our way down through the stack of shapes. You can see them each being selected until we find our central one. And once again, keyboard shortcut to bring that to the front, all right? So it's just worth bearing that in mind. It doesn't really affect our artwork because these wheel circles are not going to be filled with the color, but I wanted to give you an example there of what happens if you have two shapes, you've grouped them and you fill them both with color and you can only see one of them. It's to do with your stacking order, and the order in which you draw things will control that, okay? So do bear that in mind. So what we can do now is let's double click back out of isolation mode, reselect the entire group so we can edit them all at the same time and say fill none. Okay, so we're basically back where we were, but that was just an example of how we can change it. So once again, let's fit everything in the window. We could go ahead and maybe lock our wheel layer at this point in time, and very importantly, Command S or Control S on the PC and save all of our progress at this point in time.